everyone, and I'm Jess. I'm from Prospectors and CoreSafe, and I'm the virtual host today. So there's a few familiar faces in the crowd today, so thanks for coming back, and welcome everyone to GeoHug. But this isn't possible at all without all the fantastic speakers saying yes and being willing to share their info with the wider community. So big thank you to everyone that's joined so far. So our rock star for today's session is David Ward from Bacchus Resources. We'll be rediscovering Woolwonga with him today. So thank you, and we're thrilled to have you join.
No worries. So are we ready to go? Bacchus, everyone might not be particularly familiar with Bacchus because we're private. Which means that I don't have to spend 60% of my time raising money on the stock market. I can actually spend my time focusing on trying to find some gold. Today's presentation is called Rediscovering Woolwonga. I was originally going to deliver this at the Aegis presentation in Alice Springs prior to the COVID restrictions. But anyway, here we go. About us, so private exploration company. We have staff all over the country, offices in Pine Creek, in Bendigo, and myself in near Newcastle, New South Wales. Just skipping through, there's the disclaimer, which probably doesn't mean a great deal considering that we're private, but if you, just in case I say something that is untoward. Here is our current tenement holdings across Australia. So you can see the main one I've got it lined up there is Northern Territory. We have projects in New South Wales. The different colours there represent, the blue ones are 100% Bacchus. Red is our joint venture with Talisman Mining. They are earning in. And the green is we are earning in to a Mincor lease there at the Topham project. We are drilling some diamond holes there as we speak. North Queensland, we have a project at Chillago and another one just north of Mount Isa. But today we're talking about Woolwonga. So Woolwonga is probably our main project and the most advanced project that we have in the portfolio. So it is just near, in between Pine Creek and Adelaide River, about 170 kilometres south of Darwin. Getting to the history of Woolwonga, it was outcropping on a prominent ridge, as all of the known deposits in the Pine Creek origins, I think, were all outcropping. They had some Chinese workings on the top, and there's still some evidence of a bit of Chinese activity in the area. There was some reported production pre-1900, and they mined fairly quickly into the primary ore zone, which didn't help with their recoveries, and so they pulled out. There was a number of different bits of work going on, and Dominion ended up getting hold of the management of the project in '85, and then they ended up drilling and delivering a 5 million tonne resource at 3 grams. I've got 3 grams per tonne there. I've seen different numbers in different reports. It's 3 grams per tonne or 2.8, close enough to. So Dominion mined Woolwonga in the mid-90s as an open pit. They put in a haul road down to Cosmo Howley, which is only 23 kilometres away, right on the Stuart Highway, and they mined about 230,000 ounces that were processed at Cosmo, and they finished up in '95. So this will be evident as we go through and we see a bit more of what has been done there in the past. Is that you need to keep in mind that the gold price was $400 an ounce, and I had read a report somewhere that their margin per ounce was $16. So given what the margins are today on open pit gold mines, you need to keep that in mind so that you don't think that they just walked away from a good thing. So since then, since the close of mining, there's one small round of drilling by Northern Gold in 2004, and they drilled along strike to the southeast of the anticline axis and got that cracking intercept there, 10 metres at 7, and pretty shallow. And then not much was done since. So the mining lease, the original mining lease, was relinquished in February 2016, and we had our exploration licence granted at the end of 2016. So everything that I'm about to report on is what we've done since then. Just a bit of a background on the regional geology. Like some of these slides, I haven't gone and tried to recreate any of these things myself. They're better done by other people. As you can see, I've just grabbed these out of other presentations and reports. So on the left-hand side is a schematic diagram by Senna, I think 2004, that might have been, and that shows a schematic relationship between where the gold is in the Pine Creek origin. So that shows all of those main deposits, Woolwonga being about in the middle, and they're all generally host within these sedimentary units, and some dolerite, carbonaceous shales, and some tuffs. But the overall overriding common thing between them all is that they're generally anticline hosted. I had heard that Tom's Gully I thought was in a syncline, but that's much the same thing. So the picture on the right hand side, there's Woolwonga. So one of the significant things you'll see here is it is close by Cosmo Howley, Brox Creek, and then in between Brox Creek and Woolwonga is actually Fountainhead, which I'm sure that Charles, I saw you there earlier on the list. So PNX are developing Fountainhead at the moment, and it lies in between Brox Creek and Woolwonga. So just nearby is a fairly large granite, which arguably has been involved in the mineralising event or not, depending on how you look at it. And we can argue about that later. So local geology, and again, I've just grabbed another one from a presentation that someone else has done. So on the left-hand side there is a schematic diagram of the geology and the mineralisation as in 1990. This is prior to open pit mining. So fundamentally, it hasn't changed a whole lot. There's a little bit more structural complexity on that cross section as we see now, but we are drilling not far from where that section is, and the general geology is not far from off the mark. So looking at the stratigraphic pile here, this is the host between in the South Alligator group, a lot of these, and Mountain Bonnie Formation is the host rock for Woolwonga. So when we got the lease granted, so this is was a free peg by Bacchus. This actually shows a bit of what we saw when we first arrived. So I wasn't first on site, it was a couple of my colleagues, and they were sending back some photos of this sort of material, which was actually on top of the mineralised waste dump, which was dumped within the pit bounds. So you can see the image on the left-hand side, the massive amounts of arsenopyrite and pyrite in quartz, and then the iron oxide staining on the surrounding rocks. Most of the top of the mineralised waste dump looks like that. You get this very red iron oxide staining. So on that rock there, and this will be evident shortly when we go to some of the other images, is these are actually watermarks. So where the water has come up and down within the mineralised waste because it was in the pit. And then there's a bit of, the one on the right-hand side is a bit of what looks like it might have been on the old ROM pad. So it gives you a bit of an idea what this looks like. So this is also what it looked like when we arrived. So left-hand side, there is the main pit bounds, and there's a bit of a saddle in between. So this is mined as two pits, Reward on the northwest and Wilson on the southeast. and then that is the surface waste dump alongside on the east side. And then what you can just make out in this image too is that line down there. I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, but that line that runs off to the bottom of the page is the tarred haul road, which is still in place. So we've got a tar haul road right at the front gate, which is always pretty handy. And then as you can see on the close-up on the right-hand side, this is just straight out of Google Earth, obviously, but you can see that all of that material that is in the bottom of the pit between those two water bodies is all mineralized waste. So this is what we found when we got there. The patch on the side, on the east side of the pit, is where the ROM pad is. So the haul trucks would have come up from the pit, dumped on the ROM pad, and then road trucks would have taken them from there down the haul road down to the 23 k's to Cosmo. So we thought that straight up that the mineralized waste had a bit of promise. So we started looking into how it formed. Was it tipped and dozed, or was it just tipped over a tip face? So this is a 1994. Whilst they were mining, you can see the same outlines of the pits. This is getting fairly close to the end of the mining phase, apart from one little pit in the northwest. So you can see on the right hand side there, you can see the tip face. So that tells me that the material that we see at surface now is representative of everything that runs down that tip face. So we went ahead and did some sampling for gold. This image was obviously the water level had raised a bit, so the water level hasn't been that high since we've been around. But you can see that there's some fairly high grades there. Anything red or magenta is above 1 gram per tonne. So the bulk of the mineralised waste, which falls within the bottom of the pit, runs at averages a bit over 1 gram per tonne. So that was fairly encouraging. The next step we took was, well, how much is there? We thought fairly hard about whether or not we should go ahead and try and drill a waste dump, but given that most of it is underwater and it's already broken, I think that trying to drill some RC holes through the waste dump was not something that my MD was very keen on. So I think that what we see at surface, considering how the tipping was done on that dump, is reasonably representative of that material. So going on from sampling and showing that there's a fairly close correlation between the sulfides in the mineralized waste and gold, we did a bathymetric survey. We got the final pit survey, which is the bottom line just here off a very generous geologist that lives in the NT already. And we had a photogrammetry survey, which has for our digital terrain model, which we actually got off the Legacy Mines Department, which had already been completed. And we did a bathymetric survey using sonar. So the difference between the two, the bathymetric survey and the bottom of the surveyed pit in volume, that effectively is what we see as the volume of the mineralized waste at about 1 gram per tonne. So there's a bit over 2 million cubic meters, and depends how you do your calculation. I don't really know what the bulk side is. I said SG there, but if the bulk BD, the bulk density of that mineralized waste, is somewhere between 1.8 and 2.2 tonnes per cubic metre, then we're up around the 4 million tonnes at a gram. You can see that there's a bit of a difference between the bottom of the reward pit here on the right hand side. That is stuff that looks like it's slumped in from the side. So I think the difference in volume between the bathymetric survey and the final pit survey can be can explain that material there. So that's where we got to with the mineralised waste dump. So we know that there's some good stuff there. There's 4 million tonnes, about 4 million tonnes at 1 gram per tonne, straight up. So we went from there to, okay, well, what do we do with that material now? So we took some samples for some ore sorting test work. These guys, the ore sorting test work, I don't know how widely known it is, but I've grabbed a video off the TOMRA website. You can see the web link there below, just to demonstrate if people aren't particularly familiar with it. But what happens is that the rocks go down a conveyor belt. There's an X-ray machine which will determine the density just based on how many X-rays are absorbed by each individual rock. And then each individual rock they track each rock as it goes down the conveyor belt, and it goes off the end of the conveyor belt, and a little air jet just flicks it off into a different pile for the ones that are selected. So we're basically selected on a percentage of dense material within each individual rock. So I'm just going to let this video go and see if it works. Not sure if there's a lag time. I won't let it run for the whole 7 minutes, but we'll... Is that working? Give us a nod, Jess. Yes? Give us a dance for Teeny. Anyway, you can see the rocks being flicked off. So this is in from memory. From memory, the conveyor belt here goes 5.5 meters per second. So this is fairly well slowed down. The line there in the background is just a baffle, which just separates. So the rocks that are being selected are just getting flicked over the top of the baffle, and will go to a different pile. So this is no water required. We just need to. We found that we needed to crush to about 50 mil, so it doesn't have to be super fine. It won't sort anything below. We found with our material won't sort anything below about 5 mil, but between 10 and 50 seem to work for us. Anyway, so that one's pretty good. I'll stop that one now. Okay, so what we found was that we get about a 2/3 mass rejection on that material and still retain most of the sulfides and the gold. So that means that we can put that waste rock material, we can just do a coarse crush to 50, crush and screen to 50 mil, put it through an ore sorter, and then we'll end up with 1/3 of the volume running at, as you'd expect, about 3 grams per tonne. And then that would be the bit that would go on the back of a truck to be transported to a mill somewhere, wherever that might be. So the other great advantage of doing the ore sorting is that a lot of that mineralised waste is oxidising and forming a significant acid mine drainage issue, which some of you might have noticed. There were some white patches on the aerial photos currently for the site. So the leftover 2 2/3 of that material has so little sulfide in it that it has a neutral net acid producing potential. So might not be able to quite use it for road base, but it was pretty close to the mark, but it won't produce acid anymore, which is a bit of a win-win for the mineralised waste dump. So that's where we got to, the mineralised waste dump. Whoop. Okay, I'll get onto some rocks now. So they're good rocks because it looks like they'll make us money. When we first arrived and got the lease granted, we went on with and got a structural study done by my mate Toby Davis at Impel Geoscience, and some of the work that he did, we're still playing that game. what was discovered fundamentally is that the mineralization has come in at epigenetic. It's come in post-folding. So he's got, as you can see here, he's got D4 is the mineralizing event. So I'm not going to go into a granular detail, and I'd rather not anyone ask me too many questions about structural geology. There is a link down the bottom there. So that report, that was all presented at Aegis in 2017, and that presentation is online if anyone wants to go and see that one. So it suggests here that the mineralization is in the bedding planes is stronger in the bedding planes of the anticline axis, but it's not as important as it once thought, as originally thought. It's not just about the position of the anticline and those carbonaceous horizons. There's a later structural overprint which is bringing the mineralization in. Okay, so drilling. This is what we inherited. So the orange shapes in the pit are leapfrog modelled 1 and 2 gram gold shells based on the grade control drilling. You can see the grade control drilling is a significant data set. I haven't actually shown it here because it is, you know, there's 320,000 meters of drill hole in there. But we also inherited what was a fairly big database. So there's a lot of data there. The main, you can see there's patches of drilling which are outside of the main pit. And these are things that we're actually starting to plug a few holes into Western Ridges. There's a few things there of interest to us. So that's where we started before we arrived, and this is the drilling that we have completed since Grant. So this is a combination of RC and diamond holes. So as you can see there, we did most of the diamond drilling straight up. So each of those holes that are drilled through the line of under the pit are roughly 100 meters apart, give or take. There's a few exploration holes around the side, a couple of holes around West Pit, and then clusters of RC holes to the northwest and southeast along strike of the main pit, which is where our current focus is at the moment. We are drilling right now. We're drilling on a line just to the southeast of the Wilson pit just there. So I'm just going to skip from this plan view to a long section. It'll be looking to the south, looking from the northeast to southwest through that line just there. It'll be about 30 meters wide. So again, okay, so this was where we started. So, and you can see where the pit mined to, and you can see that there's bugger all drilling outside of the pit. So just going back to, and then, you know, you'd wonder to yourself, well, you know, what was the geology exploration, near mine exploration department doing at the time? And the answer was there probably wasn't one, because their margins were so low. The gold price was under 400 bucks an ounce. It was just a function of cash flow, I expect. But this is where we're at. You can see that just outside of the pit, there was a few interesting things. The one small drill program that was done between the end of the mining lease and before Bacchus got the exploration lease was this northern gold hole, which was 10 meters at 7, so a cracking hit. So and about 150 meters outside of the pit. So that was targeted on. You can see that the mineralization in these grade shells from the grade control drilling, you can see the bedding planes and the plunge of the anticline axis quite clearly. So where you get what is probably a rheology contrast across the different lithological boundaries into carbonaceous shales, that's where you get these lines of mineralization that you see in cross section. So what the Northern Gold guys, my understanding is what they were targeting was, you can see that out of the reward pit on the right-hand side, that plunge is a little bit steeper than it is at the Wilson pit on the left-hand side. So their assessment was that it looks like that there was some sort of a porpoising going on with the anticline axis, and the mineralization was flattening. So there should be a connection between the edge of the pit and that Northern Gold hole. So I still haven't figured out if that was correct or not. We're working on it. So flicking onto the next page, here is Bacchus's work to date. So this is the same image, just looking at a long section. I've cut this down to a 30-meter slice along the line of the anticline axis, looking to the southwest, because you get a bit too much data when you come in looking at too much of a thick section. You can see that all of these diamond holes that are spaced roughly 100 meters apart, these are the holes we have drilled, and we did that first. So you can see that there's mineralization well down in the below the pit, and drilling at a couple of different orientations. So what we've done, so the bedding planes and knowing where the position of the anticline is very important, obviously, in one of these projects. So one of the things that we've really focused on is making sure we have good orientation data. So this, I'm not sure if you can see if they popped up, but those little discs associated with orientation data for just the bedding, for all the diamond drilling to date, and then there's a cluster of bedding plane data on these holes in the northwest. This is actually televiewer, so we trialled some downhole televiewer, which has been fantastic. So we're just waiting for the COVID restrictions to ease before we can get those guys back to do a lot more of that televiewer data for us. It's really nailing the position of the anticline axis for us very well. So these bedding plane orientations feed into what is a bedding in turbulent, which is just a fairly basic function in leapfrog. So if you can see past the obvious artifacts, so this thing down in the south, there's a few artifacts and the fact that those bedding planes look like they tip over on the north end, that's just a lack of data. But what fundamentally we see is that we see, just modelling the orientation data we have from our drilling, it fairly closely represents the bedding that we're seeing in the from the grades in the pit. So that's all worked out fairly well for us at this stage. Going back to the structural model that was created by Impel, Toby Davis by Impel in the past, that was presented, it actually showed that the anticline axis was fairly straight in the middle, and then it'd swing away to the west as you went along strike to the northwest. And that's exactly what happened when we drilled some holes, RC holes in the northwest on the right-hand side of the screen here. And it showed you can see that the bedding planes have got a bit of a twist in them there. So what's happened there is the actual position of the anticline axis has swung pretty strongly away from the page in this orientation. So that's been really good for us. It sort of explains why we didn't hit certain bits of mineralization at that northwest end. At the southeast, the data we have to date is all fairly conformable with what was seen in the Wilson pit at the other end. So that's all, southeast end is all holding together as expected. The northwest end, we've got some really good results. So, but it's a little bit more complicated because the anticline axis has swung away, and there's not a straight line on it for us anymore. So, results from the work that has been done to date. These are selected intervals that I've picked out to represent on the page. The gram meters for each of those intercepts is up there on the right-hand side. I'm not sure if anyone can see that one, but red or magenta is better than 20 gram meters. So it gives you a bit of an idea of grade and width. So I have labelled a whole heap of these intersections. So you can see all of those ones labelled orange. So keeping in mind that the mined grade, the head grade was about 2.8 when this was mined. You can see that the grades along the bottom are respectable. There's some pretty broad intercepts there where it crosses the anticline axis, but they're not 2.8. Some of them are high enough, but you can imagine that if you did a resource model for this, that the resource model is not going to come out at the same grade as the pit was mined at. And there's a pretty good reason for that. It's about drill hole orientation and where the bedding planes are and where the higher grade material is. So the first hole 1, which is the ones we've labelled as in red, you can see the grades of them are significantly different from the grades below. And what that's doing is we're actually collecting the contact point between where those preferential mineralized horizons are in the nose of the anticline axis. Whereas all the other drill holes that you see there, they're labelled in orange, are drilled across the line of the anticline axis. That hole is actually drilled down perpendicular to the plunge of the anticline axis. And I've just, another way to demonstrate that one, I've just grabbed another, so there, okay, there's gives you a bit of a rough depth. So 230 metres from that 22 metres at 2.5. So as you'd imagine, we work up a fairly good inferred resource based on some of that drilling as it is to date, immediately below the pit. So just going to the geometry and that orientation of those drill holes is fundamentally different, because you can see this middle section here. This is another slide I grabbed off Impel's presentation that was at Aegis a few years back. So you can see that if a drill hole was drilled down the line of the anticline axis, it's going to grab that mineralization, that high grade mineralization, which volumetrically is lower in volume but carries a fair bit of the grade. So some of the holes you're going to get a fairly representative. You drill the hole through the middle of that section and to the north, you're going to get looks like you're going to get a fairly representative one. But if you drill a hole through the other sections, you're going to get the mineralization, but it's not necessarily going to collect those high grade zones. So what that also tells us is that we need to be, if we're wanting to get to a higher grade category of resource model in the future, we need to increase the drill density significantly. So that's where we're going. So adding drill density was the next phase. So you can see the diamond holes are all in the middle, and then we run off at either end. So looking at this section, the obvious target, and a lot of geologists will immediately target in on this zone here, where you've got that good grade running out of the reward pit into this space here. It's still underneath the pit. The pit has still got water in it. So all of those, any holes that you're going to drill in there are going to be diamond holes. Yes, that's probably the most likely place to drill holes if you were just focusing on adding ounces to a resource model. But you can see based on where the pit is and where the water line is, that was the water line there a few years back, that you're not going to get to that space quickly. So what we did was we jumped into the either end along strike from the pits. You see the pit here is shallower. That's where the mineralized waste is. That will be a start point for us. And so a good spot for us to start is going to be mineralization that is running out of the bottom of the Wilson pit and off to the southeast. So there are some of the grades that we've been getting in the recent drill holes. You know, it's effectively a resource drill out. Those holes are on these two sections here are 40 meters apart, and they're on 10-meter sections. So I haven't actually shown a cross section for that space because it's a bit confusing. There's a fair bit of structural control on the mineralization, and I haven't really figured it out myself. It looks fairly conformable with what we're seeing in the pit based on the grade control drilling, and we're just waiting for to get the televiewer back to run down those holes, and that'll add a significant element to help us make the orientations on the for a resource model for that area. You see at the northwest end, even though the anticline axis has actually swung away from the page significantly, we're still getting some really good numbers in some structures. So, you know, 7 at 15, 10 at 8.5. They're wide open and require a fair bit more drilling in order to figure out and include those into a resource. We're been a little bit constrained because the hill that was the Woolwonga ridgeline is still there in that northwest end. So we're a little bit constrained as to where we can drill from at that end. But we're getting there with that, and we're getting some great results. So that's about where we've got to with the drilling. As you can see from those results, there's some fantastic numbers coming out of it, and we're very, very hopeful, or very confident that that they will continue to drill and get some of these great grades. So the hole that Northern Gold drilled in 2004 is just in here. So we're not entirely sure whether or not at this stage that bedding plane is flat. So the top of that mineralization coming out of the Wilson pit is represented by that SET4, or if it is another stratigraphic horizon that runs off. And if it is another stratigraphic horizon, you can see that there's open space off to the southeast there that hasn't been drilled. To the northwest, these holes had that 5 at 5. So there's still a lot of spaces that still need drill holes, but we're pretty happy with where we're at. So moving forward, this is our final slide. Moving forward, where we're going at the moment is we're going to continue to do our resource drilling along strike to the southeast and the northwest, with a view to put those numbers into an indicated resource this year. We expect that there's broader space drilling immediately underneath the pit. We should be able to be drawn into an inferred resource. We might be able to get some of the stuff that is a little bit closer immediately below the pit, where we've got some of the previous resource definition data just poking through the bottom of the pit. Some of that might come into indicated, but this is where we're going at the moment. So when we've got that finished, we should be able to use that as a fundamental base for a scoping study into mining of the deposit. So yeah, that's where I'm at. I might leave that last screen up, Jess.
No problem at all. That's awesome. We have had a question come through. So Phil, you're welcome to jump off mute. But his question was, what sort of variability from sample to sample downhole do you see? The intercepts are quite broad, and they're wondering what influence the higher grades have. Any duplicate sampling completed?
Yeah, so we take a lot of duplicates. So some of those high grade samples are running. So if I just click back to some of those ones, so obviously an interval that's running 11 meters at 10 is going to have some really high grades in it. So there's going to be multiple samples there that are running an ounce or more, and we will visually pick those samples. The geologists on site will visually pick them and resplit nearly all of them. So we'll be doing, so I haven't looked at the exact numbers, but it'll be more like about 1 in 30. And the repeat samples through the lab are nearly spot on.
That's good news. So, sorry, I was mute for the time being. My kids are quite loud. I see veins popping out in their necks, so I thought I'd type the question. But no, that's good news, David. Good news. So is the core cut, or is it whole sampled, or sort of duplicates off course crust? So I imagine it'd be hard to get a.
So sampling of the so we cut and sample everything. We don't do any selectives. We do very little selective sampling. So we've got an autosaw based in Pine Creek, and we've got what is, as you can see, there's a shed full of core there now, and it's all half core. So that will be crushed and riffle split at the lab. So when the lab actually gets a high grade sample, they'll actually go back to that bulk reject and resplit that high grade sample and then assay it again before they give us the assays.
Okay, good stuff. No, I imagine it'd be difficult to get two equally mineralized halves when you're cutting mineralization like that. So.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, but like all of the QA that I've seen to date has been considering there are some really high grades. I'm quite surprised at the repeatability, to be honest. Yeah.
Ah, good stuff. It's impressive. Thanks, David.
Yeah, no worries.
Was there any other questions that anyone had to put forward, or all good? I think.
Dave,
yeah.
Dave, you see, Doug here. Do you see any repetitions in the sequence? I noticed that the folds are fairly tight. Is there any potential in your license for any additional sort of repetitions?
Yeah, so the areas off to the west that are called Western Ridges, there's actually they're outcropping quartz ridges with old workings on them. The workings aren't as significant as they were, as my understanding is, on the main ridge, but as they are quite tight, there's going to be multiple anticlines going west. So yeah, there'll be space for half a dozen of them, Doug. So yeah, there's a lot of open space there at the moment. I mean, I'd really like to drill a few more holes out there, but at this stage, what we're focused on is we've got some pretty good stuff. We've got that mineralized waste and some reasonably shallow stuff that we think we can open pit. What we should be focusing on is trying to get to a point where we can start getting some cash flow in off the project,
yep.
and just continue on and drill the bejesus out of it.
Yeah, makes sense. Good project, mate. Well done.
Houston.
Quick question, David.
Yep.
Yeah, Gary Price here. Yeah, just been watching the work you've been doing over the last year or two, and thanks for the presentation. I'm pretty interested in the ore sorting technology you were talking about, and was just wanting to quiz what sort of throughput, what sort of expense that kind of equipment, what sort of capital outlay is there for that sort of equipment?
Look, the guys at Tomra would probably give me a backhander if I started talking numbers to you, but that it's not as expensive as you think. Like, so those units come in sea containers, so you can put them underground. They'll work on nearly everything. So those the throughputs from memory, because that belt's running at 5.5 meters per second off the top of my head, you can run that up to 80 tons per hour for that one unit that sits inside a sea container. So you know, and there's no restriction on how many you can have. Like, so if you know, the outlay of those, and then you add a couple of them or 2 or 3 just to increase your input. They've actually got a new one that's just coming out recently, and I haven't seen a presentation based on that, which within the one system they've doubled the throughput. And I don't quote me on that one, but I think that they can crank those things right up. Yeah, so I think that they're a game changer when it comes to processing technology, especially if you haven't got a mill already. It's highly likely that you probably only needs to be half the size or less. If you do have a mill already, you can install these things, keep the mill throughput going at the same rate, and just increase your mining, your mining to fill the mill just with material that's 3 times the grade. It's an absolute no-brainer. And those guys, like, there's 2 different groups that sell them, Steinert and Tomra. I've been in to see both of them and seen both of their equipment running, and they're based on the same principle. The Tomra guys have got one, a full-blown version in a shed in Sydney.
Yeah, if I could just get some contacts off you just after the presentation, send you an email. If I could get some contacts, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Like, so the company is that I took that image off is Tomra, Tomra, and they're pretty easy to find. So I've just grabbed that video previously off their website. But by all means, if Jess, you want to pass on my email details to anyone who wants them, I'm happy to share.
Excellent.
Great, thanks, David.
No worries.
Well, I think that's it for questions at this point. So thanks everyone for coming. If you've got a bit of time up your hands, stick around, jump off mute, put your cameras on, catch up with each other, have a drink, and yeah, look forward to the weekend. So thanks again, everyone, for joining. And yeah, I think next week we've got Oz Minerals doing a presentation. So please jump on, register if you're available. That one is at 5 o'clock Eastern time. So yeah, thanks again. So that's all good.
No worries.
Perfect.
Thanks, Jess. Great platform.